Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So I'm just walking down towards Main Street in Haworth today, and as always the place has visitors, people wandering around, but people mostly heading up to the parsonage behind me and obviously to the churchyard. All those places we know so well, and don't get me wrong, they're beautiful places and there's a reason people come here, but I always find something else really interesting, and it's when you step off the main stretch, because just behind all of this, just off the side, there are these little corners of Haworth where life was actually being lived, properly lived, not just the Brontes, but all the everyday people who were here at the same time. People with families, jobs, struggles, celebrations, birth, death, all of it was just happening in these tiny streets just out of sight. And today I want to take you to one of these places. It's called Lodge Street, although in the Brontes' time it was known as Newell Hill. And I have to say, there's one particular character I've come across here who I think is absolutely fascinating. A joiner called William Wood. I mean, what a great name. And honestly, once you start looking into him, he seems to have been involved in just about everything. So let's head off to Main Street, through a little gate, and take a closer look. So as I do my usual wander, like I do around Haworth, making an idiot of myself with my camera, tripping over things, getting in people's way, and the bells! Oh. I'm so pleased they are back. Patrick's bells are ringing again for the whole of Haworth to hear, and with the crows and the sound of life, it's proper Haworth. And I think it might even rain today, so we might have proper Haworth, proper wuthering weather. Oh, I'm so pleased to be here today. Best shop in the world. Great cakes. Amazing knickknacks. I don't know if that's a British word, but you know what I mean. Absolutely best Sunday lunch you could ever want in your life. The two pretty shops, as I call them, because they've got lots of pretties in that makes my bank account cry, but still amazing. And then chocolate shop. Well, I don't need to say anything about chocolate shops, do I? I'm sure you can guess. But then across the road is a little gate. So, this is Lodge Street, or Newell Hill as it was once known in the Brontes' day. And it's very easy to walk straight past this little cul-de-sac without really noticing it, because most people are either heading up or down Main Street looking for the touristy places like the parsonage and the church. And this just becomes one of those little sort of gaps between buildings that you barely glance at. But when you actually stop and look properly, you realise there's an awful lot of history just packed into this very small space. The name Newell Hill seems to connect to the Newell family, who were clearly active in parts of Haworth during that 19th century. There were Newells running a draper shop at number 81 Main Street, just below here, and a William Newell was a bookkeeper working from number 55. So even the naming of this little street is tied into working people, local trade, not wealthy landowners or grand families, but original villagers trying to earn a living. And I think that immediately tells you something really important about this place. This wasn't a quiet, decorative side street. This was part of a working network of homes and workshop and businesses and community life feeding directly into Main Street itself. The cottages here are kind of tightly arranged together, built from that same dark millstone grit that gives so much of Haworth its character. And even now the whole place still feels very enclosed somehow, almost sort of folding in on itself. The cobbles, they kind of carry on from Main Street through into the yard here in front of the houses, and you can immediately imagine how worn and uneven they once were, what with the constant use and people walking backwards and forwards, and you got children running around, deliverers coming through, tradesmen carrying materials in and out to William's house. And although today it feels quite quiet and quaint, in the Brontes' day, this would have been absolutely full of movement and noise. You'd have had doors opening and closing, people talking across the yard, children playing in the middle of the court, smoke drifting out from chimneys and animals being kept nearby, and all the ordinary sounds of people living very closely together. And because the street itself is so small and enclosed, everything would have felt intensified somehow. So the noise would have been sort of echoing around the stone walls, and the smell from, say, the smoke fires and the animals and cooking and waste would have been lingering in the air. And life here would have been incredibly visible because people were living almost on top of one another. So when tourists look over here now, they probably just see, oh, look, quaint little stone cottages. But in the 1840s, this was not quaint. This was a busy, working, practical part of the village where lives could be hard, crowded, noisy, and at times probably quite overwhelming. These weren't decorative buildings. They were homes, they were workshops, they were meeting rooms, all layered on top of each other in a way that feels very typical of 19th century Haworth. And that's really where this story of good old William Wood begins. William Wood, what a great name, was a local joiner and cabinet maker who lived here at number 6 Lodge Street. And once you start looking into his life, you realise he was absolutely woven into the fabric of Haworth. He wasn't a distant tradesman who occasionally appeared to do the odd repair. He seemed to have been somebody that Mr. Brontë called upon regularly whenever work needed doing at the parsonage or around the village. And when you start piecing together everything he actually did, it's quite remarkable. He worked on repairs to the church, including strengthening the tower and installing Patrick Bronte's new bells in the 1840s. I mean, that must have been a huge undertaking in a village like this. And then just a few years later, he was involved in major repairs at the actual parsonage itself, including re-roofing the building around about 1850. So this is someone who was physically shaping the buildings we know associated so closely with the Brontes. And I think that's something people often forget. We tend to think about the Brontes inside these spaces, you know, writing, living, grieving, and carrying on with everyday life. But somebody had to maintain these buildings. Somebody had to repair the roof when it was leaking, or strengthen walls when they weakened, or fix furniture when it was broke. And very often that somebody was our William Wood here. There's even an old image, which I think is amazing, of the parsonage from around about 1851, which shows a man up on the roof beside the chimney stack whilst repairs are taking place. Now, we can't say for certain that it's William Wood, but considering we know he was carrying out roof work around about that time, it's really tempting to imagine that it might be him. And I rather love that thought, because suddenly this man from this tiny little side street becomes part of one of the most famous images in Brontë history. And And what makes it even more interesting is that his workshop was actually on the first floor of this building here, with a large take-in door that can still be seen today, although it's now blocked up. I'll show you in a minute. And just to clarify something here, because this building can look a little confusing from certain angles, what we're actually looking at is 3 levels built into the hillside. The small cottages were down on the lower level. William Wood and his very large family lived on the middle floor, and then above them was the workshop. So when I mentioned the block door being on the first floor, it's technically the workshop level above the family home. And through this doorway would have come timber, furniture, tools, and perhaps most hauntingly, the coffins that William would have made for the local families, including members of the Brontë families themselves. And when you stop and you think about it, it suddenly makes this quiet little street feel incredibly significant. But what I really like is imagining the everyday connections here. I mean, I can almost picture Tabby Ackroyd, the Brontes servant, sending one of the children down from the parsonage with a message asking William to come and do some small repair or loose fitting or a table leg that needs fixing, something simple like that. And you get this sense of the Brontë children just walking up and down these very steps, completely unaware that the people living here were helping to maintain their home and their life. And when you stand here, or sit here in my case, it really doesn't feel difficult to imagine that. It's absolutely hoofing it down, and I'm getting soaked and I'm cold. So I think the universe is telling me it's time to go get myself a cup of tea and maybe a little cake, and maybe come back a bit later on and try and film without getting so wet. But I think it does mean, sorry, microphone, I think it does mean that the faithful carrier bag might have to come out to keep my bottom dry. It's getting famous, this carrier bag. It's the best invention though for sitting on cold, wet stones though. Just please stop rain, I've had enough now. And what makes William Wood even more interesting is that his work didn't just disappear into history. He actually made a mahogany dining table and 6 chairs for Charlotte Brontë, and those pieces are still in the parsonage today. And I think that is absolutely amazing really, because when people walk around the parsonage looking at the furniture, they probably don't stop to think about the fact that some of those pieces were made by a man living just here in this tiny cul-de-sac off Main Street. And so you're still looking at an object he physically created with his own hands, just up there. And I love details like that because they suddenly make history feel really tangible. This isn't some sort of vague connection written down in a book somewhere. Oh no, this is real craftsmanship from a real person whose daily life was rooted in Haworth. And when you think about it, William Wood wasn't making decorative museum pieces for tourists to admire behind ropes and glass cases. He was making practical furniture for a working household. Things that would have been used every single day. Meals eaten around that table, conversations had around it, letters written on it. Ordinary moments of family life taking place on furniture made by somebody from this very street. And somehow, I think that makes the parsonage feel more human. Because again, it reminds you that this was a lived-in family home. Furniture wore out, things broke, repairs were needed, and local people, like our William Wood here, were part of keeping that household functioning. That connection between this little corner of Haworth and that parsonage itself is much closer than people realise. And then you add in the family link, because William Wood was the great-nephew of Tabby Ackroyd, who of course lived at the parsonage for decades and became such an important part of the Brontë family life. And for a few years, between 1839 and 1842, Tabby herself actually lived here in Newell Hill after temporarily leaving the parsonage. She shared one of the cottages here with her widowed sister Susan Wood, who was William's great-grandmother, along with several of William's growing boys. So again, it stops feeling like some separate world. The parsonage and the streets were deeply connected to one another, The people knew each other, relied on each other, worked for each other, visited each other. And I think that's what I find so fascinating about social history, because when you start looking at the ordinary lives surrounding the Brontes, the whole village suddenly feels much more alive. It all feels very interconnected, very ordinary, and so very real. Lodge Street has another layer to it as well. From the 1830s, one of the buildings here, the rooms above what is now number 9 Lodge Street, became home to the Three Graces Masonic Lodge. And that is actually where the street gets its modern name from, because before this, as I said, it was known as Newell Hill, but once the lodge moved in, people gradually began referring to it as Lodge Street instead. And I really like that detail, because it shows how buildings and communities can completely reshape the identity of a place over time. Now, the Three Graces Lodge had originally formed in Barnes Oldwick in 1792, before eventually moving into Haworth in 1806, where for many years it met at the Black Bull Inn. But in 1833 it moved here into these new rooms above the houses. And when you stand here looking at it now, it feels almost strange to imagine formal meetings taking place above this tiny little street. Men gathered upstairs in Masonic meetings, whilst ordinary people and ordinary lives carried on directly below them. I mean, you can imagine children running around outside, washing, hanging between the houses, tradesmen coming and going, people cooking, arguing, laughing, trying to manage everyday life, all while there was an important meeting and discussions were taking place overhead. And Branwell Brontë was actually a member of that lodge. He joined in 1836 when he was only 19 years old, which was actually younger than the normal age for joining. So that suggests there was some real connections and influence involved. And from what we know, Branwell seemed to have taken it quite seriously for a time. He acted as the organist and the secretary, as well as a junior warden within the lodge. So this wasn't just him casually appearing once or twice, he actively involved it in his life. And I think it gives you a slightly different picture of Branwell as well, because we often think of him only within the parsonage, surrounded by his sisters, or later during those sadder periods of his life. But here, you suddenly get a glimpse of him moving through the village society, attending meetings, climbing these very steps outside, taking part in organised community life away from his family home. And it reminds you that Branwell was not shut away in the parsonage all the time. He was part of the social world of Haworth too. And what's interesting is the lodge rooms didn't only serve one purpose either. For a period around about 1850, they were also used by the Mechanics' Institute. Now, Mechanics' Institute were created to provide education and learning opportunities for working people, particularly in industrial towns and villages. So again, this tiny little street suddenly opens out into something much bigger. You've got social clubs, you've got education, discussions and self-improvement, and community organisations all happening in rooms above ordinary cottages in the middle of Haworth. And I think that is something people often miss when they picture Haworth in the Brontë period. It wasn't frozen in literary history. It was a living village full of activity, ambition, work, learning, and community life happening alongside the Brontë story. And then there's William Wood himself, because once you start looking into him properly, you realise he wasn't just a tradesman passing through. He had a very full, very busy life here in Haworth, rooted in this tiny corner of the village. He married twice, first to Mattie Ogden in 1830, and together they had 4 children in just 5 years, which, when you stop and think about it, must have been exhausting in itself. And then, sadly, Mattie died in 1835. Now, in a place like Haworth at that time, death was part of everyday life, like we've said before. It's very hard for us to imagine nowadays, but people lived closely together. Illness spread quickly, conditions were harsh, and families often experienced grief very directly and very frequently. But life also had to continue, and so William remarried, this time to Anna Oldham, who'd been one of Mr. Bronte's Sunday school teachers, and together they had 9 children. So in total, William Wood fathered 13 children. 13! And when you stand here in this tiny cul-de-sac and really think about that, it's extraordinary, because this wasn't a wealthy family living in comfort. It was a working craftsman in 19th century Haworth trying to support a huge household through skilled manual labour. Every chair that he made, every repair completed, every coffin built, every roofing job taken on would have mattered financially. There would have been mouths to feed constantly, clothes to mend, fires to keep going through bitter Yorkshire winters, illnesses to worry about, babies crying, children under your feet, older children helping care for the younger ones. And all this was happening in a village that could be cold, smoky, overcrowded and incredibly difficult at times. And yet, despite all of that, William Wood seemed to have built a very good reputation locally. He became somebody trusted by the Brontes, trusted by the church, and clearly respected enough to be involved in important work around the village. And I think that's what makes him such a fascinating figure, because he represented the skilled working people who quietly held places like Haworth together. Not the famous people or the wealthy people, but people whose labour shaped the village every single day. And when you start to imagine all those children growing up around Lodge Street, running around the cobbles, playing between the cottages, hearing tools working upstairs in the joiner's workshop, it really adds the feeling of this place being alive. Not just some historical setting frozen in time, but somewhere full of people trying to get on with ordinary, everyday life. And when you sit here and you really think about it, Lodge Street would have been incredibly busy in its day. Sorry, I got distracted by the little door. Not in the way we think of it now, what with traffic and tourists, but busy with life. You had families living in very close proximity to one another. You had children everywhere, trade happening inside and outside the homes, animals being kept nearby, washing hanging out between the buildings, smoke drifting from chimneys, people constantly moving in and out of these tiny little spaces. But, or I should say, and, according to records from that time, 14 families were living here. 14 families in this very small enclosed area, and some of these families were large as well. I mean, when you think of good old William Wood here, fathering 13 children, you could begin to realise just how densely packed this part of Haworth really was. I mean, the cottages themselves were small, and many homes doubled as workplaces too. So home life and working life completely overlapped. You had tools and timber in one room, then cooking happening in another, and children sleeping upstairs, and probably animals being kept just outside. And all of this before modern sanitation, before proper sewage systems, before the big public health reforms that eventually started changing conditions in places like Haworth. So instead of drains and proper water disposal, there were communal midden heaps where rubbish and human waste would be piled together. And in a tightly enclosed street like this, especially during warmer weather, the smell must have been absolutely dreadful at times. The records even mention woolcombers working in some of the cottages nearby. So you would have had fumes, dust, smoke from the fires, that horrible damp air that comes with it. And of course your animals, your overcrowding, all trapped together within this small enclosed court. And suddenly you begin to understand why illness spread so quickly in villages like this during the Bronte period. Because this was not clean Victorian romanticism. This was hard, physical, everyday living. But despite all of that, it was still a community. Children would have played together across these cobbles. Neighbours would have known each other's business, whether you wanted them to or not. But people would have borrowed things, shared news, argued, laughed, helped one another celebrate birth, mourn death, all within a few feet of each other. And I think that's important to remember, because when people picture Haworth now, they often see a very romantic image. Pretty stone cottages, cobbled street, cosy little shops, dramatic moorland scenery. And of course, it is really beautiful. But behind that image was a much harder reality for the ordinary working families who lived here during the Brontë period. We've got some really cold winters, exhausting labour, overcrowding, disease, uncertainty. This was not a quaint historic village to the people that lived in it. This was everyday survival. And somehow, for me at least, knowing that makes Haworth feel more real and even more fascinating. And I think this little street captures it perfectly. Oops. So here we are, the end of the journey. Finally found William and some of his children and his wife here in the Haworth graveyard, a stone throw from the very roof that we know he worked on. And yeah, it's lovely to finally find him after learning so much over the last few days about him, his family, where he lived, what he did, and now to finally find where he actually is, hopefully below us, is yeah, it makes me feel quite emotional. I feel like I've got to know this man and his family and his life, and then suddenly here he is, his name actually carved in stone here in Haworth itself. Whereas, you know, you read the books, you find out the information, and it's all just words on a page. But this is his place in the world, his last place. Yeah, so I feel a bit, got a lump in my throat. But it's lovely to think he's here amongst neighbours, friends, and then to the side, I don't know if you can see properly, we have another Wood, I'm sure part of his family. Nice to meet you, William, at last. I feel like I know you very well, and what a beautiful gravestone you have. And this is where the story ends. And I've just felt a spot of rain, so maybe it's the best time to go and get a cup of tea. Nice to meet you, William, and his wife, Anne. Towers and installing Patrick Bronte's new bells. Pause it there a second. Oh, cute dog. William Wood. This was not. Wait. You wouldn't believe how many times I've tried to do my outro. It's getting busier on Main Street, and what's happening is people are walking up and down. I'm getting a lot of noise now. I'm also getting a lot of people stopping to have a look to see what I'm doing. And I'm not very good at that. I kind of suddenly go, oh, I can't think of my words, or I freeze, so. I absolutely love all your comments, all your interaction with me, and I am doing my absolute best to try and reply to every comment I've ever had. When conversations go on and on and on, I really do struggle, but your first comment I really do try and answer and interact with everyone, because I think if you take the time out of your busy days to watch me and to make a comment, the least I can do is reply. But as time goes on, I'm struggling with that. So if I've missed your comment, I'm really, really sorry. If I haven't replied, I'm really, really sorry. But I've been doing this for about 2 years now, and I've gone from having probably about 30 subscribers to now having over 9,000, and I'm getting quite a few comments now, so it's really hard. But just wanted to say I am so, so grateful for everything you guys do. Even the dog's happy about it. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, and please don't think I'm ignoring you. I'm just struggling to keep up. And what I find really interesting is how easy it is to miss all of this, because people are walking past here every single day, going up and down Main Street to visit the parsonage or the churchyard, completely unaware that just a few steps off Main Street is all this layered history. People's lives, buildings, people that raised families, they struggled, they survived, but they shaped the village in very real ways. I think sometimes that's the side of Haworth that fascinates me the most. Not just the famous names, not just the literary history, but the ordinary people whose lives were completely intertwined with the Brontes world. And because it's very easy to think of Haworth as this sort of frozen historic village, almost like a film set at times, but of course it never was. This was a real working community. People here dealt with noise, overcrowding, illness, hard winters, money worries, huge families, physical labour, and all the ordinary realities of life. And yet, at the very same time, just up the hill, the Brontes were living their lives too. And somehow, for me at least, learning about people like William Wood makes the Brontes feel more real, not less. Because suddenly the parsonage is not just a museum building, it is a home that needed repairs. I mean, the church tower needed strengthening, furniture needed making, doors stuck, roofs leaked, tables broke, and the people living in this very street helped keep the whole world running. So that's Lodge Street or Newell Street, just one tiny little corner of Haworth, but I think it tells a much bigger story than people realise. And I'd genuinely love to know your thoughts on all this. So here are my questions. Number 1, have you ever walked through Haworth and found yourself more interested in these sort of quiet side streets than the main attractions? Number 2, did you realise just how much everyday life was happening in these small corners of the village? And number 3, do you think learning about ordinary people like William Wood actually helps us understand the Brontes world in a deeper way? I'd really love to hear your thoughts, so please pop them in the comments. But I've thought of some questions that I haven't said, which was, have you ever come across any lesser known stories, streets or people connected to Haworth that surprised you? Or are there any sort of hidden corners of Bronte country that you think deserves a closer look? I'd love to have a look. So let me know below, that would be great. So thank you, as I always say, for watching my videos. I really do appreciate it. If you like this video, please do the whole likey, subscribey, hypey thing, because it really does help me out and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Bronte content. Have a good weekend, take care of yourself, and I will see you all the Friday after next, hopefully not in the rain, for more Bronte adventures. See you soon. Bye.